One moment I was standing at the kitchen counter, reaching for my blood pressure pills, and the next I was on the floor. Just like that. No warning, no dramatic build-up. 1 second upright, the next crumpled against the cabinet with my right hip screaming and my vision going grey at the edges. I didn't panic. That surprised me later, thinking back on it. I just lay there on the cold linoleum, staring up at the underside of my own kitchen counter, and thought, well, here we are. I'm 68 years old. I live alone in the same house in Guelph, Ontario, that my late husband and I bought in 1987, when the streets still had elm trees and the neighbours all knew each other's names. I've lived alone for 6 years now. Since Harold passed, I manage the garden. I shovel my own walk in winter, or I did until that morning. I am not, and have never been, someone who needs rescuing. But I needed rescuing that morning. My phone was on the counter above me. I couldn't stand. Every time I tried to shift my weight onto my right leg, the pain made my vision go white. I managed to pull myself along the floor to the hallway, where I'd left my reading glasses and my phone on the little table by the front door. It took me 20 minutes. I know because the radio was on in the kitchen, CBC2, the morning program, and I tracked the time by the music. I called 911. The dispatcher was kind. She stayed on the line with me until the paramedics arrived, and she kept her voice very steady, which helped me keep mine steady too. In the ambulance, the paramedic, a young man with a red beard who reminded me of my nephew, asked me who my emergency contact was. My daughter, I said. Her name is Kelsey. He asked for her number. I gave it from memory. I've had it memorized for 30 years, the way you memorize the things that matter. I remember asking, just before they wheeled me into triage at Guelph General, "Did you reach her?" The paramedics said they'd left a message. I didn't think much of it. Kelsey works as a marketing manager in Toronto. She's busy. She probably had her phone face down in a meeting. I told myself that, lying on the hospital gurney while a nurse cut my favorite cardigan off with scissors. I told myself she'd call back any minute. That was at 8:40 in the morning. The surgery. They needed to do a partial hip replacement. The break was bad enough that a pin wouldn't hold. Was scheduled for early afternoon. Between triage and the operating room, the hospital staff tried to reach my daughter 11 times. 11 calls to her cell phone, 2 to her office line, and 1 to my son-in-law's number, which I'd listed as a secondary contact. Nobody answered. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I had to. 11 calls, not one returned, not a text, not an email, nothing. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia was a nurse squeezing my hand and telling me everything was going to go smoothly. I asked her if they'd reached my daughter. She had a very kind face. She said, "We're still trying, Hon. You just focus on breathing for us." I woke up in recovery at 4:30. A different nurse was there, checking my chart. I asked about Kelsey before I asked about my hip. "Has my daughter called?" The nurse checked something on the computer. We do have a note that she called the main desk around 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock. My surgery started at 1:15. She called while I was already on the table. Is she coming? The nurse chose her words carefully. I could see her doing it. She said she was out of the city this weekend and would check in with you directly. Would check in with me directly. I lay there with my hip throbbing and a tube in my arm and the smell of antiseptic in my throat, and I thought, out of the city this weekend, like I was a task on a to-do list, like I was a subscription to cancel or a form to file. I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry. I just closed my eyes and listened to the beeping of the monitors and let myself feel how alone I was in that room. Kelsey didn't call my personal cell until that evening, around 7. By that point, I'd already been moved to a recovery ward, and my neighbor, Petra, 64 years old, drives a pickup truck, brings me soup when I'm sick, had somehow found out through another neighbor and driven to the hospital with a bag of my things, my phone charger, my library book, my own pajamas. When Kelsey finally called, I was sitting up in bed, eating a bowl of soup that tasted like nothing, while Petra sat in the visitor's chair and pretended to read a magazine. "Mom, I'm so sorry, we were up at the cottage and the reception there is basically non-existent. You know how it is at Carl's family's place. Kyle is her husband. They've been married 9 years. The cottage belongs to his parents, and it is, I'll admit, genuinely remote. A place on a lake north of Parry Sound, up a winding road where the hydro lines don't quite reach." "The hospital called 11 times, I said. Silence. "Mom, they called your cell. They called your office. They called Carl's number. 11 times, Kelsey, while I was waiting for surgery." More silence. "Then I didn't have reception. I keep telling you, it's a dead zone up there. It's not like I was ignoring you." She wasn't lying about the reception. I knew that. The cottage was a dead zone. She'd complained about it herself 6 times. "And yet, you went to the cottage," I said, "and you didn't tell me. I told you last month we were planning to go up in May. You told me you were thinking about it, not that you'd booked it." "Mom, I'm not having this conversation right now, okay? You just had surgery. How are you feeling? Is everything okay?" And just like that, we were talking about my hip, and the question of who hadn't answered 11 calls somehow became something I was supposed to set aside. The way I'd been setting things aside for years. I want to be fair about Kelsey. She was not, for most of her life, a neglectful daughter. When she was small, she was the kind of child who worried about things, worried about me, worried about whether I'd eaten enough, whether I was cold. She used to climb into bed with me during thunderstorms, not because she was scared, but because she thought I might be. There was a tenderness to her that Harold and I were so proud of. I'm not sure when it started to shift. Somewhere after she married Kyle, I think. Carl's family is prosperous, I'll say. His parents have the cottage up north, a condo in Scottsdale, a boat. They take the whole family to Mexico every February. Kelsey fit into that world in ways she'd never fit into ours, and I watched her reshape herself to match, slowly, over years. The organic grocery store instead of Food Basics, the Audi instead of the Honda, the way she'd started talking about Harold's old neighborhood, our neighborhood, as up and coming, like it was a real estate listing and not the place her father had lived for 40 years. I don't begrudge her the life she's built. I want to be clear about that. But somewhere along the way, I started to feel like I was a detail she was managing rather than a person she was caring about. She and Kyle came to see me at the hospital on Sunday, 2 days after my surgery. They brought a plant from a greenhouse in Oakville that probably cost $60 and looked like it required more maintenance than I was going to be able to give it from a hospital bed. Kyle shook my hand. He has always shaken my hand. In 9 years of being my son-in-law, he has never once hugged me. They stayed for 45 minutes. Kelsey took 2 phone calls, stepping into the hallway. Kyle answered emails on his phone for the last 15 minutes, the way he does. Not rudely, just absently, like he'd run out of things to say, and the phone was a polite way to fill the silence. When they left, Kelsey hugged me and said, "We'll figure out the logistics, Mom. Don't worry." The logistics. After they were gone, Petra came back with a Tim Hortons coffee and sat down in the visitor's chair and said, without looking up from her magazine, "She seems very busy." "She is," I said. Petra turned a page. Harold would have driven through a blizzard. I didn't say anything, but she was right. The thing about being in hospital is that it gives you a great deal of time to think. The physiotherapist comes for half an hour. The nurse comes to check your vitals. Otherwise, you are alone with your thoughts and the sound of the hallway and whatever is on the small television mounted to the wall. I spent those days thinking about the 11 calls, not in an angry way at first, more like, I kept returning to the image of the phone ringing somewhere up north on a lake in a dead zone 11 times, the hospital number flashing on a screen no one was looking at, and I thought about how I had listed Kelsey as my emergency contact, not because it was a formality, but because I believed, genuinely believed, that she was the person who would come. On the third day, I asked one of the nurses, a practical woman named after her grandmother, she told me, and clearly used to managing people's feelings without coddling them, to help me get onto my laptop. I wanted to check my email. I also, I'll admit, wanted to see if Kelsey had posted anything on Facebook while the hospital was trying to reach her. She had. The post was time-stamped Saturday morning, the morning I was on the floor of my kitchen, the morning the paramedics came. It was a photo of the dock at the cottage, the lake behind it, the trees coming into their spring green, Kelsey and Kyle standing together in fleece vests, coffee mugs in hand, looking comfortable and easy and happy. The caption was, "Perfect long weekend, no emails, no obligations, just us and the lake. This is what it's all for." No obligations. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the laptop and looked out the window at the parking lot in the grey Ontario sky, and I thought, I see. I'm not a dramatic person. I don't tend toward scenes or ultimatums. I cried once, quietly, that afternoon, when the ward was quiet and the physiotherapist had gone. Then I stopped, because crying was not going to fix my hip or change what I'd read, and I have never found it useful to feel sorry for myself for too long. What I did instead was think. I thought about the house, our house, Harold's and mine, and then mine alone, a 4-bedroom detached in a neighborhood that had, as a matter of fact, gone up in value considerably since we bought it. I'd had it appraised twice in the past decade. Once when I was thinking about refinancing, once out of mild curiosity. The last appraisal, 3 years ago, put it at just over $850,000. Kelsey knew this. We had talked, loosely, never formally, about what would happen to the house when I was gone. She was an only child. The assumption had always been that it would go to her, not that I had a will that said so, specifically. Harold and I had done basic wills years ago and never updated them, which I knew was an oversight. But it was simply understood. I thought about that understanding. I thought about 11 calls and a Facebook post with a coffee emoji. I thought about the logistics. When Kelsey drove me home from the hospital 10 days later, I was on a walker, moving slowly, the stairs a significant project. She stood in my kitchen and started talking about options, whether I'd thought about a retirement residence, whether I might want to look at a more manageable living situation. She said this standing next to the kitchen counter where I'd fallen, looking around the kitchen like she was measuring it. "I'm 68, I said. I had a hip replaced. I'm not moving into a retirement home. Nobody said home, Mum. A residence, a community. Lots of people love them." She paused. "This house is a lot to maintain. I've been maintaining it for 6 years. You fell. People fall, Kelsey." I got back up. She left that afternoon looking slightly irritated, which I recognized as her way of indicating that I was being unreasonable. I had been unreasonable in her view several times over the years. When I didn't want to sell the house after Harold died, when I didn't want to do a reverse mortgage, when I didn't want to give power of attorney to anyone until I was in a situation where I needed to. The week after I came home, Petra came every day. She drove me to physio. She made casseroles. She fixed the loose step on my back porch that I'd been meaning to call someone about for 2 months. She also, without making a production of it, helped me go through some of Harold's boxes in the basement that I'd been avoiding since he died. One afternoon, while we were sitting in the kitchen with tea and the boxes finally dealt with, she asked me what I was going to do. "About what?" She gave me a look that said, "You know what." "I called a lawyer," I said. I had, in fact. I'd called a lawyer in Guelph, my family's lawyer for years, the son of the man who'd done our original wills, and I had an appointment to update my will and set up a proper power of attorney. Not because I was vengeful, because what the past 2 weeks had shown me was that I had been operating on assumptions, and assumptions were not plans. The appointment was 2 weeks after I came home, by which point I was moving with a cane instead of the walker and managing the stairs. My lawyer's name is not Patricia. He's a quiet man in his 50s who takes notes in pencil and speaks plainly, which I appreciate. We discussed the will. We discussed who I wanted to have power of attorney. I chose Petra, with my nephew as a secondary, rather than Kelsey, which was a decision I had not anticipated making, but which, when I said it out loud, felt correct. We discussed the house. If you sold, he said carefully, and moved into something smaller, a condo, a bungalow, you would release significant equity. I knew that. There are good options, he said, especially if you want to be in a position of financial independence. You could live very comfortably on the proceeds, and there would still be an estate. I know, I said. I've been thinking about it. I had been thinking about it, not because Kelsey had suggested it, because I had, lying in that hospital bed, started to imagine what my life would look like if I stopped organizing it around assumptions and started organizing it around what I actually wanted. What I actually wanted was to live somewhere with a smaller garden that I could manage without wrecking my back, somewhere on the ground floor, somewhere closer to the physiotherapy clinic, and the library and the little French bakery on Wyndham Street, where I went on Saturday mornings when the croissants were fresh. What I actually wanted was to not spend another winter worrying about the furnace in a house built in 1964. I listed the house 8 weeks after my surgery. I did not tell Kelsey I was doing it until the sign went up. She found out through a friend's mother who happened to drive past. She called me at 9 in the morning, and her voice had a quality I hadn't heard in a long time. Something tightly wound, not quite anger, something adjacent to panic. Mom, is the house listed? I saw a photo on Facebook. Someone posted. Yes, I said. You listed the house without telling me. I told you I was thinking about downsizing. Thinking. You said thinking. You didn't say you were, Mom, that house is. She stopped. Started again. We should have talked about this. I agree, I said. We should have talked about a lot of things. A pause. She heard something in my voice. I could tell she heard it. What does that mean? It means that I've been assuming we were on the same page about a great many things, and it turns out we weren't. So I'm making clearer plans. Is this about the cottage? Because I explained about the reception. Kelsey. I kept my voice even. I'm not angry. I want you to hear that. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I spent 10 days in hospital thinking about what I want the rest of my life to look like, and I have some clarity now that I didn't have before. The line was quiet. I have spoken with a lawyer, I continued. I have updated my will. I've designated power of attorney. The house will sell. The market is good this spring, and I'll be moving into a condo near the river. It's on the ground floor. It has a small balcony where I can grow tomatoes. I'll be close to everything I need. And Mom, what about? She couldn't quite bring herself to say it directly. What about what I was expecting to inherit? What about the house I thought would come to me? There is still a will, I said, and I am still your mother. Nothing has changed in that regard. But I am also 68 years old, and I had a partial hip replacement, and I lay on my kitchen floor for 20 minutes, unable to get up. And what I need now is to live sensibly and carefully, and in a way that doesn't require me to depend on people who have told me in their own way that they're not available. She was crying by the end of that call. I felt it coming through the phone, the wet sound of it, and I felt the old pull. The pull I'd spent my whole life feeling, the one that said, smooth it over, she's upset, make it better. I felt it, and I let it pass. I love you, I told her. That's not the question. That has never been the question. I didn't tell her about the power of attorney, not that day. She found out eventually when it came up in a different conversation, and there was another difficult call, and I had it the same way, calmly, evenly, from a place that felt like solid ground. The house sold in 9 days over asking. It was a young couple, engineers, I was told, who had been searching for over a year and had lost 3 bids before ours. They walked through on a Thursday evening and submitted by Friday morning. My real estate agent, a woman about my age who wore excellent shoes and spoke without euphemism, called me with the number and then said, "That's a retirement, love, if you want it to be." She was not wrong. I moved on a Thursday in late June. Petra helped. My nephew drove down from Barry with his truck. Kelsey came too. She showed up the morning of the move, unannounced, in old clothes, and she carried boxes for 3 hours without talking much, which was the right thing to do. I didn't say anything about it. I made her a sandwich at noon. We ate standing in the empty kitchen of the old house. And she cried a little, looking at the walls. "I grew up here," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry, Mom, about the cottage, about all of it." I looked at her, my daughter, 41 years old, standing in the kitchen where I'd made her school lunches for 12 years, where her father had taught her to make pancakes, where I'd sat up waiting for her the first time she'd borrowed the car. I had loved her so completely for so long, in ways she didn't know about, because they mostly happened when she wasn't looking. "I know you are," I said. We hugged. It was a real hug, not the brisk, polished thing we'd been exchanging for years, but an actual hug, the kind that takes a moment. It didn't fix everything. I want to be honest about that. One hug in an empty kitchen doesn't undo years of accumulating distance, doesn't restore the instinct that should have made her drive back from Parry Sound the moment she saw 11 missed calls from a hospital. Those things take longer to repair, if they repair at all. But I'm in my condo now. The balcony faces east, which means I get the morning light. I have 2 tomato plants, a pot of basil, and a geranium that is doing extremely well for a plant that lives on a second-floor balcony in Ontario. The physiotherapy clinic is 4 blocks away. The French bakery is 6. I walk there on Saturday mornings, slowly with my cane, and I sit at the small table by the window, and I drink my coffee, and I read whatever I've got from the library, and the croissants, when they're fresh, are as good as I remembered. Petra comes on Wednesdays. We've started a habit of walking along the Speed River Trail, as far as I can manage comfortably, and then we find somewhere to sit and watch the water for a while. I'm getting stronger. The hip is doing what it is supposed to do. Kelsey and I talk more than we did before, which sounds strange given everything, but it's true. Something about what happened cracked something open between us, the way a frost sometimes does, destructive first, then clarifying. We are not back to where we were, but we are somewhere new, and new is not the same as worse. I didn't do any of this to punish her. I need people to understand that. I made changes because I finally, clearly understood something I had been almost understanding for years, that love is not the same as reliability, and hope is not the same as a plan. I had been waiting to be chosen, waiting for Kelsey to demonstrate, through some concrete act, that I was a priority, not a burden, not an obligation, not a line item in the logistics of her life, but a person she would come to in a crisis. I stopped waiting. I chose myself instead. And here, on this east-facing balcony in this modest condo, in this city I have lived in for 40 years, watching the morning light come in over the rooftops and listening to the CBC and drinking coffee from the same machine I've had since 2011, I find that I don't grieve the decision. Not even a little. I grieve some other things. I grieve the version of our relationship I used to imagine. Sunday dinners, Harold at the head of the table, all of us laughing about something. I grieve the grandmother I might have been in a house with a real garden. I grieve the years I spent assuming that being a good mother automatically meant being treated like one. But I am here. I am moving through my days with a clarity I haven't had in years. I sleep without the particular low-grade anxiety that comes from living alone in a large house that needs more than you can give it. The tomatoes are coming in. If you're hearing this and you see yourself somewhere in it, if you've been lying in a hospital bed listening for a phone that isn't ringing, or if you've been making excuses for the people who should have shown up and didn't, I want you to hear this. You are not asking for too much. You are not being difficult. You are allowed to make plans that do not depend on people who have, however quietly, told you not to count on them. It is not too late to stop arranging your life around who you wish someone was and start arranging it around who you actually are. I did it at 68 with a new hip and a cane and a pot of basil on an east-facing balcony. You can do it too. There's a moment, somewhere in the middle of all of this, that I keep coming back to. I'm lying in a hospital bed in Guelph, the ward quiet around me, and I'm looking at a photo on a screen, my daughter and her husband on a dock, coffee mugs in hand, the lake behind them, the trees just coming green. And the caption says, "No obligations." I think about what I did after that. Not immediately. I didn't act from anger, and I want to be clear about that. I lay there for a long time. I thought carefully. And then, slowly, I started making decisions. That's the part I didn't expect to feel proud of. Not the decisions themselves. Selling the house, updating the will, choosing differently, but the how of them. The fact that I did them with a clear head rather than a wounded heart. I'd like to think that matters. I think it does. What I've come to understand is that the consequences of that weekend didn't come from nowhere. They were the result of years of me arranging my expectations around what I hoped rather than what I observed, and years of Kelsey slowly, without meaning to, learning that her absence would be absorbed without consequence. We both played a role in how things got to where they got. That's not an excuse for 11 unanswered calls. It's just the fuller picture, and I owe it to myself to see the fuller picture honestly. What changed me was having to think clearly in a situation where I had every reason to fall apart. When you're in a hospital bed and your hip is freshly replaced, and you're looking at evidence that the person you counted on most was posting about no obligations, you can either dissolve into it or you can think. I chose to think. Not because I'm unusually strong, but because I finally understood that dissolving wasn't going to help me. Nobody was coming to help me dissolve usefully. I had to be the one to figure out what came next. That took something I hadn't exercised in a while, the willingness to be honest about what I was actually seeing, rather than what I wanted to see. Kelsey is my daughter, and I love her. And she didn't come. Those two things are both true, and sitting with both of them at the same time, not collapsing the one into the other, not pretending the second one away, that was harder than the hip surgery. What Petra showed me, just by being there every day with soup and a pickup truck and a steady presence, was that reliability is its own kind of moral act. It doesn't have to be grand. She didn't make speeches, she just showed up. And showing up consistently, over time, without being asked, that's not a small thing. I had undervalued it for years. The condo on the river is not the ending I would have written for myself at 40. But I'm 68, not 40, and the ending I would have written at 40 was built on assumptions that turned out not to be true. The ending I have now is built on something more honest. It's quieter. It fits. I have tomatoes coming in on the balcony. I have coffee on Saturday mornings at the bakery on Wyndham. I have a hip that works and a will that says what I actually mean, and a friend who comes on Wednesdays and walks with me along the river. That's what I made with the time I had left after I stopped waiting to be chosen. It's enough. it's more than enough.